Fermented dried beans come to the factory from around the globe, and from there, everything is done here on site by hand, from roasting to packaging.
The chocolate making process begins on the farm. These farms are tropical. They're 20 degrees north and south of the equator, so think hot, humid, remote. There's a pod on these trees. The pod is pulled off when they're ripe, and they break these pods open. They gather the beans, and then they bring them to what's called a central fermentary. It's the very beginning of what's called the fermentation process. That's going to take about 4 to 7 days. The beans need to reach about 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Sugars are turning into alcohol. The alcohol is turning into acetic acid, and this place is where all flavor begins in chocolate. They're going to dry in the sun for maybe 5 to 10 days, depending on the humidity and the temperature and the rains in that season. And then they're going to be put in bags, put on a ship, and they'll make their way to our factory here. We're one of the only chocolate makers in the United States that actually imports cocoa beans. Once the beans get here, they're going to be cleaned, and by clean, we just mean sort of shaking the beans so we can remove stones and twigs and things like that that might harm our roaster. And once they're cleaned, they're brought across the street to our factory. We roast the cocoa beans. This is a place for us to actually have an influence over the flavor of the chocolate. It's our only chance. The farmers influence flavor in fermentation. We influence flavor in roasting. It's very, very important. And if we don't have good beans to start with, then we're not going to have good chocolate to end up with. So we have perfect cocoa beans coming from these farmers, and our job is to really sort of enhance what they've done and not mess it up. Once these beans are roasted, then we're going to take the shell off of the bean in a winnower. And we use that shell, by the way, too. We don't throw it away. Brewers buy it to make beer with. We sometimes give it to farmers to use as a fertilizer and mulch. But what remains is the inside of the cocoa bean, and it's called a nib, a roasted cocoa nib. We put them in what's called a universal refiner. It's a big grinder. These nibs are heated and ground up over time in our factory, and what we'll do to make chocolate is add organic sugar. Then over more time, maybe it could be 8 hours, 10 hours, 16 hours, we have chocolate.